Coming up on Nexus Extra, Princess Diana's butler and the revelations that shocked the world.
She told me on the night Harry was born. I cried myself to sleep knowing that my marriage was over. She said, I fear that my husband is planning an accident in my car. When I watched the coronation, my heart broke because Diana's sons should have been united and they weren't.
Hello and welcome to Nexus Extra. This week we've been looking at the coronation of King Charles III, and Paul Burrell has kindly agreed to stay with us a little longer, and we'd like to introduce him to an international audience now. Paul, you went into Buckingham Palace as a teenager. Can you just describe why and how you were employed by the royal family and what your duties were right from the beginning?
Well, I was a very lucky boy. I was only 18 years old when I first started at Buckingham Palace. I left a catering college in Buxton in Derbyshire and was sent to, for royal service at Buckingham Palace. And within 1 year, the Queen had spotted me and she said, I'd like to take a closer look at that young man. Would you send him upstairs? So I went upstairs for a day's duty with Her Majesty and she kept me. She kept me for 11 years and she became my surrogate mother in many ways. Now, I know that's hard for you to believe out there because the Queen was a rather remote figure to many people, but to me, she wasn't. She was a wonderful, warm, kind Christian woman, not anything like you see in The Crown. She was such a humble person and the closest to divinity I've ever witnessed. The Queen taught me so much about life. She said to me one day, I was still very young, and she said, have you ever thought about getting married? I said, no, Your Majesty. She said, well, why don't you look around the palace? There's some fine young girls in here. You'd find a wonderful wife. So I found Prince Philip's maid, married her, and had 2 boys with her.
That's great maternal
so she
advice.
said to me, you'll find it's a wonderful institution, and when children arrive, they're the glue that holds it all together. So she took a great interest in my life and my world. It wasn't my mother I rang when my children arrived. It was the Queen. She said, please tell me what you've had and will you bring your baby to see me? So she became very, very close to me. And throughout her life, she always sent messages and gifts and notes. And she'd watch my career pan out through the princess's world and then into a public life. And she'd look at the newspapers every morning. She'd point me out and say, look what he's doing now. Is it true? Can he be doing this?
And how did you make the transition from Queen Elizabeth II to Princess Diana?
Well, I'd known Princess Diana since she was married to Prince Charles in 1981. She was always traveling with the family. She became my friend. And we soon became aligned because we were of a similar age. And she relied on me. Even when I was with the Queen, she knew I was the Queen's ears and eyes, and she could get messages straight to Her Majesty through me. So I was very useful. And then, of course, when the royal marriage was in difficulty, she said to me, would you consider coming to look after me because I don't have anyone? Charles has an army of people and I don't have anybody that's aligned with me. So would you be that person? So I left the Queen begrudgingly. I didn't want to leave Her Majesty at all. But the Queen said to me, but Paul, you're not leaving me. You're just moving to one side for a short time. And then when Charles and Diana are King and Queen, you'll be back at Buckingham Palace doing the same job. Why wasn't meant to be.
It's interesting that Diana needed a shoulder to cry on, so to speak. What
Yes.
was she going through at the time? I mean, it's very well known to a British audience who grew up with it, but for an international audience, what was Princess Diana going through at that time when things were going so bad with Prince Charles?
When I arrived with the princess in 1987, she'd been married just for 6 years to the Prince of Wales, and she had 2 small children. And she was going through a very difficult part of her life. She'd been abandoned. And she told me, on the night Harry was born, I cried myself to sleep knowing that my marriage was over. I said, why? She says, well, Charles came into the room, looked into the cot, and saw a baby with red hair, and said, red hair? And I said, well, you know that's the Spencer gene, Charles, because we've all got red hair. And then Prince Charles said to her, on the night Harry was born, well, at least now I have my heir and my spare, and I can go back to Camilla.
My goodness.
Diana was devastated, knowing that her marriage was over.
What was the implication with the red hair? That she had had an affair?
Well, no, I have to tell you, I have to put this record straight. The red hair is the Spencer gene. It's nothing to do with the paternity of Harry, which came much later, of course. Diana was never looking for love until Charles had returned to Camilla's bed. And that's the truth, because I was there.
So saying I have my heir and my spare, is that where, sounds like a Dr. Seuss rhyme, is that where Harry got the title for his book?
I think that is where Harry got the title from his book, because he always knew that he was number two. That was his role, to be number two to his brother. And Diana thought that Harry understood that role, that he would be William's wingman, William's number two, and would always be there for him to support him on his road to monarchy. Diana was very proud of her sons being royal princes. She was very proud of the whole family because they were part of the royal family, and she supported the monarchy.
I mean, obviously you looked after their mother, but what was your relationship like with Harry and William when they were young?
My relationship with Harry and William was very strong because they were two young boys, too young to understand their mother's adult world. And you think about your own children, they don't want to know what happens behind closed doors. I was privy to all of those secrets, and I think, I have a key to a certain part of the princess's life, which I would love to turn and open that box for William and Harry, because now that they're adult, grown, with families of their own, there are certain things that they should know about their mother's world. And the fact is, she wasn't embraced, she wasn't loved, she wasn't cherished, she was abandoned. And that's the biggest tragedy of all, that nobody took care of her, nobody was there for her. But I was there at the end of the day, and I could pick up the pieces, but I was just a butler. I didn't hold any position in the royal household.
Well, now that Harry's grown up and has written his book, Spare, in that book, he has a few words for you, indirectly in a way,
Yes.
because he describes you as really nothing more than Mummy's butler. He doesn't even use your name. Why do you think he did that in his book?
I'm very saddened about what Harry said about me, or hasn't said about me, because really Harry knows the truth. Harry was there at Kensington Palace when he came home, when I was looking after his mother. When he came home from school, I was always there. But Harry and William were never there during most of the time. They were away at boarding school. But at the end of Diana's life, Harry does know that I protected her in death the way I did in life. And I sat with her the whole night before she was buried. I asked him if he would like to come and join me, and both him and William said no. You do it, Paul. And so I stayed with their mother. And I was there at the graveside with William and Harry. So, our relationship is very strong and very deep.
You were keeping vigil.
And it puzzles me.
You were keeping vigil the night before she was buried.
I kept a vigil on the night before Diana was buried, and stayed with her awake all night and spoke with her. It was my time. I did ask the family if they'd like to come, and no one came. So at the graveside, I'm standing with William and Harry and the family, and so Harry knows how close I was. to his mother, but he doesn't want to publicly acknowledge that.
Well, he says he's
I think
angry at you for publishing a book in which it was, well, he says it was a
But-
tell-all book that told
True.
nothing, essentially.
Yes, but Harry didn't put my book into context. I'd been taken into the highest court in the land and accused of stealing items from Diana's estate. I had to defend my reputation, and I had to defend my family and my children. I was left penniless, without a reputation, and I had to put something back. Surely Harry would understand that from a mental health perspective, the fact that I had nothing, and I had to build something back as a father and as a husband, which surely he understands now, being a husband and a father himself. So really, Harry took a swipe at me for no particular reason other than to diminish my role with his mother.
Did you portray Princess Diana in your book?
No. When I wrote my book, A Royal Duty, I wrote it with the knowledge that the Queen would read it. And so I sent my manuscript to Buckingham Palace for the palace to read, and they did not object to it. There was no injunction.
Do you think
I was left to print it?
Do you think he's a hypocrite? I mean, in his book, in which he exposes his entire family, he's criticizing you for doing that to Princess Diana.
Well, I think it's quite rich that Harry should criticize me after he's done the very same thing. He's spoken about his mother, his life, he's opened his world to the media, and really he's become a journalist. The very thing that he railed against, journalism. And I thought that Harry wanted privacy and to bring up his family in a different country and keep them safe and shut away the media. But now we see, of course, he opens the doors to the world for a price. I have a problem with the fact that Harry actually has commercialized his entire world to the tunes of millions, whilst his brother has stayed quiet and doesn't have a voice, even though he has been criticized and Kate has been criticized, and those people have never put a foot wrong. So there's something adrift here somewhere. Something's not quite right about this equation.
You mentioned your court case and that you were being prosecuted. The Queen herself intervened and put a stop to it. First of all, why did she intervene, and how is it that she has the power to do so?
When Diana died, I asked to go and see the Queen at Buckingham Palace, and I remember she'd known me for a very long time. And I said, Your Majesty, I need to tell you exactly what's happened behind closed doors. I need to tell you what I have seen and heard so that you can be informed. And during that 2-hour meeting at Buckingham Palace where we stood, I told her everything that had happened in my world, because she was my monarch and my duty was to her. And the reason she stopped my trial was because during that meeting, I had told her that the Spencer family had been destroying items of the princess's estate and taking away things willy-nilly. And documents were being shredded, and certain documents which the princess had given to me in trust, I did not want to hand over to the Spencer family so that they could destroy them. I said I was keeping certain artifacts safe, and because I told the Queen that, she realized when my trial was at the Old Bailey, she was going up Ludgate Hill to the Bali Bombings ceremony, celebration service in St Paul's Cathedral. The Queen was going up Ludgate Hill to St Paul's Cathedral and noticed that there were trucks outside the Old Bailey. She turned to Prince Charles and said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, it's Paul's trial." And she said, "Has it gone that far? My goodness, what's going on down there?" The minute she returned to Buckingham Palace, she called the Lord Chancellor and told him about our conversation at Buckingham Palace. And that completely undermined the trial. And I was set free.
Well, people talk about having friends in high places. You had the a friend in the very
Well,
highest place.
Yes, well, I thought that Prince Charles would save me. I thought that Prince Charles would come forward and say, "This is nonsense. Paul has items that we've given him over the years, and my house is filled with royal memorabilia and items that they've given me. It's common knowledge in royal circles that the royals give things to their staff because they don't want them or they don't have any use for them."
Do you resent Charles for not stepping forward?
I wish that the Prince of Wales had been kinder, not just to me, but to his wife. But now he's king, and he swore an oath before God in Westminster Abbey. Incidentally, his mother told me, the Queen once said to me, "I remember that moment vividly. She said, it stayed with me for the rest of my life because when I was being anointed underneath the canopy, I felt I was in the presence of God." Now, I hope the king felt that too, because he's mellowed in age and he's become more serious. And I hope he thinks twice about the things that he does and the people whose lives he touches, because he is close to divinity now. And he is trying to fill his mother's shoes, who are they're very big shoes to fill.
Can I ask you about your time with Princess Diana? Did she ever express any concerns that her life was at risk? Because we know what happened to her, obviously. We know there's an enormous
Yes.
amount of speculation, and some people will just not believe that she died in an accident.
Well, I can only tell you what I know. And she wrote me a letter once in her own hand on her own stationery. And in it, she said, "These are the most difficult months of my life. I fear that my husband is planning an accident in my car, head injuries, in order that I will die so that he can remarry." Now, when you look at those words written by the princess, and I still see them today, it's spooky to think that she prophesied her own death. And I often think to myself that if that had been a letter from Anne Boleyn saying, "I fear my husband's going to chop my head off," it would be in the National Archives. But this letter that the princess wrote to me has been dismissed. It's been dismissed as gossip or a spooky psychic letter that doesn't have any significance. But you know, the princess did fear for her life. She thought she was being tapped. She thought she was being bugged. She thought she was being followed. And I think it's now being proven that she was. And she was before her time and she was informed. I don't know what happened in Paris because I wasn't there. The first thing I saw was when I went to Paris and the princess was already dead. And I held her hand and talked with her. She said to me the greatest moment she ever had was when she held the hand of Adrian Ward Jackson, who was dying with AIDS. And she said, "I felt his spirit lift from his body." And she said, "I hope that there's somebody there for me when that happens." And it just so happens that I was sat in Paris holding her hand, but she'd passed. And I said, "Are you still here? Are you still with me? Are you still in this room? As you said, the spirit lifts from the body. Are you here?" So for me, that was one of the greatest moments of my life, being able to be with her and take care of her in death the way I did in life.
And do you think...
And Harry knows that.
yeah, yeah. And
Harry knows that.
And do you think there ought to be further investigation? Could there be? Is there any scope for it?
I don't think there's an appetite for further investigation. I don't know where they would go. I'm sure that MI5 and MI6 do know exactly what happened in Paris. And I don't think that will happen until William is king. I think both William and Harry are uneasy at the fact that they haven't got the full picture. They don't know exactly what happened in Paris. They don't know who was there and why they were there. And I think one day when William is king, he will have the power to unlock that door and find out the truth.
And just finally, Paul, given everything you've just told us, and I think it's touched you to recount these details for us, and I appreciate that. When you were watching the coronation and you saw, King Charles with now Queen Camilla, what were your feelings?
When I watched the coronation, it was a bittersweet moment for me, because having lost our queen, whom I was very close to and was very dear to me, and having lost the princess who rightly should have been there, I was thinking, I wonder what she would say. I wonder what she would think. And I had to rationalize this by looking at her two boys in the congregation and thinking, well, the show must go on. And that when William gave his pledge to the king, knelt and kissed his father's cheek, and he said, "Dear boy," my heart broke. And it broke because I looked at Harry's face. Diana's sons should have been united at that moment in time, and they weren't. There's a divide now bigger than there's ever been between them. And she would be so upset at that. She would be devastated to think that her two boys lived on two different continents and were not speaking. What I felt was the monarchy has to survive, and Diana knew that. And she would have had the grace to say, "Good luck, Charles." And the same to Camilla, because Diana would have now moved on into her own sphere, into another world, into love, probably, and would have been happy. But none of that was meant to be. So you can't actually put it all in the same place at the same time. We have to survive. And I have to be pragmatic now and think I have to cross that bridge with Charles and Camilla, because I can see in the wings waiting Diana's son, William, with his beautiful wife Catherine, waiting just to take up the reins. And as they stood in Westminster Abbey, I thought to myself, they're watching the rehearsal for their own coronation, because this monarchy isn't going to be long. This reign is not going to be a long reign. It's going to be a short one. And then William and Catherine will take over. And then the country will be united in thinking, wow, at last, William is king, and his wife will be sat there on the throne with that ring. It will be sitting on the finger of a queen. And then, for me, the journey is complete.
Paul Burrell, thank you so much for your time today on The Nexus. We really appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT1. Until next week then, goodbye.